that happen in life that seem coincidental. So I would say the subject of tonight's talk about flip side is coincidence. That there's no coincidence that you all are here tonight. It seems random. You might know Sue, you might know her store, you had other things to do tonight, you know you do, you did, right? Other things came up into your life, but for some reason you said, no, I'm going to this thing. I'm going to get in the car, I'm going to drive over here, I'm going to park, I'm going to go in, I'm going to hear this guy talk. Now, how many of you have read this book or are familiar with me? Oh, great, okay, a virgin crowd. Excellent. So, and all right, so let's start with that. And how many of you are familiar with Michael Newton's work? Okay. Oh, okay, about half of you. Very good. And Brian Weiss's work? Almost everybody? Everybody knows about Brian Weiss? Also, no? Brian Weiss, okay. But past life regression we've all heard about, right? We're all familiar with. And half of us are familiar with life between life examination. There's not really a term for it because it's not a regression. It's more of an examination. And my journey to this work is a little bit unusual. So I'll just give you a little bit of background on me. I'm a writer, director. I come from Chicago. I came out to LA back in the 70s. I flipped a coin. I was trying to decide whether to live in Rome and be a writer living in Rome, or maybe I should go to Los Angeles and see if I got into film school or not. I think I'll flip a coin. So I took out 100 lire, is what it was. It was a 100 lira coin. Heads, stay in Rome. Tails, go back. And I flipped this coin and it came up heads. And I thought, oh, shit. And then I realized, oh, that's my reaction, then it must be that I've got to go. So I got on the next train, literally, and then moved to Los Angeles. And by the way, I don't know how many years later, 9 years ago, that's what I know, when my daughter was born, that night she was lying on my chest in the hospital in St. Monica's, and I dreamt about that coin flip. I had not thought about it once since it happened. But here I was 30-some years later, and the coin was flipping in my dream, slowly, slowly, slowly. And I realized in that moment that everything that had happened, from that coin flip to that moment in the hospital, was like a road map. And I could see all the points along the path. That whole journey, relationships, this person, that person, however it goes, this job, that thing. Oh, I see. This is why you're on the planet. I felt it in my bones. So, that would be something you might consider coincidental, but at the same time, I'm here to talk to you tonight about how that's not the case. That the reason that you're here tonight and the reason that you chose to be yourself is not coincidental. And if there was an underlying question in tonight's talk, it would be, why did you choose yourself? Okay? That's what we're going to get to. And by the end, you're going to go, oh, I understand. I hope. Knock on wood. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about Michael Newton. You may not know, you know, anybody, you've read his books? Journey of Souls,
yes,
Destiny of Souls,
Life Between Lives,
and then the fourth one, I don't know, you might not have
I
seen
didn't
it.
read the fourth one.
Yeah, fourth one is, he edited it, it's called Memories of the Afterlife.
Oh.
And basically, the idea was that he's trained so many different hypnotherapists around the world that they would write a book using their, let's say, their best client, like a story about somebody that came in. And then they would be able to follow up with the client to find out what actually happened. And then Michael sort of makes comments about each of these cases, which are mind-boggling. Mind-boggling, because it's not him talking about the research. It's someone else. It's a therapist in South Africa. It's a therapist in Austria, you know, talking about their client that came in this one day, and then this thing happened, and then you interview the client, and then they say, confirm all those details. So, in my case, it was about 1996, and a dear friend of mine was dying. Her name was Luana Anders, and we had been together about 20 years, very close. And as she lay dying, she said to me, I feel that I'm going to another galaxy. And I said, well, why? Why do you think that? And she said, well, I have this recurring dream that I'm in a classroom in another galaxy, and everyone is dressed in white, and they're speaking a language I don't understand. I've never heard before, but I completely understand. Okay? And of course, my reaction was, I thought, oh, well, that must be the morphine talking, you know, because she was dying of cancer, and you know, they'd given her that morphine stuff, and you know, that can make you hallucinate. But then the day she passed away, a good friend of hers called me up on the phone and said, I had the most fantastic dream about Luana, our friend. She was in the 4th dimension, she said, and she was in a classroom, and everyone was dressed in white, and she looked incredibly happy. Classrooms in the afterlife. What? Now, I mentioned it to the nurse who had been taking care of her, and she nearly fainted and said that was her recurring dream. She told me about it. She had this recurring dream about being in a classroom in the afterlife. And I thought, well, that's unusual, but I kind of stored it away because there was no way that I could talk to anybody about classrooms in the afterlife. I also felt like she was so advanced spiritually that, you know, that's a classroom I couldn't get into. Right? You know, like credits to get into the college. I had no way to get into that classroom. So, but she was a Buddhist, and she had studied Buddhism for a long time here in Los Angeles, and I wasn't really that up on it or aware of what Buddhism was at the time. And then I got a job in New York working on the Charles Grodin Show. The actor Charles Grodin, we had a talk show on CNBC for a number of years, and we're friends, and he asked me to come and produce like Man on the Street kind of segments. So I was there and sort of meditating on Luana, because as she passed away, I had some dreams where she spoke to me in these dreams, and they felt real. But you know how dreams are. You know, you wake up thinking, wow, that felt really real, but then you kind of put it aside. Well, that was a dream. So, but I also thought to myself, well, if she can speak to me, because it seemed very unusual what she was saying, is it possible that she is somewhere? I mean, if it's true that people die and go somewhere, right, or they can come and visit you as a ghost or whatever, where are they when they're not with you? That's a pretty simple question. Are they just floating around? Are they, you see what I'm saying? So it's a fundamentally simple question. Where are you? Was my question to her. So one night while I was in New York City, it was late afternoon, I was drifting off to sleep, and has anyone ever had an out-of-body experience? So you know what that is. But that's like, you get a buzzing sensation, and then you sort of feel yourself floating above your body, and you can see yourself, and sometimes you see other stuff. You know, people have them all the time in near-death experiences. You know, operating rooms and stuff like that. Well, in my case, I'd had a few when I was younger, and I just put them aside because, you know, it didn't affect me in any way. I just say, oh, that was unusual. But in this case, I had this experience of being out of my body and shooting into outer space. And I was traveling at such a great rate of speed that I could see New York City disappear below me, you know, the way like you would in a movie. And then I was hurtling through space. I mean, this was the experience I was having. Hurtling through space and seeing stars pass me by. And so I was aware or conscious of the fact that I was going so fast that I was going beyond that. And then I had an unusual experience of making a turn and going through what I can only describe as a wormhole, because when I saw the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, I went, oh yeah, that's the experience I had. So I went through some kind of a thing where I tumbled, and then when I came out on the other side, I was now traveling left to right instead of forward. I don't even know what that means, but that's the experience I was having. And then I stopped, and there was Luana standing in front of me, and she had her eyes closed. And as I got right to her face, she opened her eyes, as if to say, "You wanted to know where I was. Here I am." And at that moment, some guy outside the car window, outside my apartment, honked his truck horn. And New York trucks, really loud. But the odd thing was that he pushed the horn, and within the split second that takes, I had the experience of coming back, almost like a rubber band, being pulled back through space, all the way back to see New York coming up at me at a high rate of speed, and then being conscious. And when I sat up in my bed, I went, okay, what was that? So I was fully conscious of the experience. I felt that I had seen her. And that's where my quest began. If she's out there, how can I go see her again? Do I have to get in a spacesuit and get in a rocket ship and fly through deep space? I mean, that was my quest. How do you get back there? How can I go find her instead of her finding me, if it's possible? So I began studying, because she was a Buddhist. I thought, oh, maybe she had a talent that she learned here, that you could communicate. I don't know. I didn't know anything about it. But I started studying Tibetan philosophy with this gentleman, Robert Thurman. He's Uma's dad, and he's written quite a few books, and he's the head of Columbia University Studies on Tibetan philosophy. Very deep thinker and fella. We became friends. And one of the stories that he told, it was in the New York Times Magazine, and he's actually told me this story a few times, because I've asked him to repeat it. But when he was a young man, he decided to become a Tibetan monk through a series of unusual events. He was the first Westerner ever ordained by the Dalai Lama, okay, about 1960. And he had a teacher, a Tibetan teacher, a lama. I see the Tibetan sage over there, Lobsang Rampa. He had a Tibetan teacher who was very hard on him and was very, really kept him in line and kept saying to him, "You're never going to make it as a monk. I can just see that. You're not going to make it." And he was like, "Yes, I am." And then he met Uma's mom. And then he didn't make it as a monk, because they went off and had 5 and 6 kids together. But anyway, and so when at some point his master, his teacher, passed away, and he was supposed to have been reincarnated in Dharamsala, which is a town in India where the Dalai Lama lives. Okay, a lot of Tibetans are there. And so Bob heard that this young boy had reincarnated. He was about 5 years old. So he went to see his old teacher without telling him he was coming. So he just knocked on the door, and this family answered the door, and he asked in Tibetan, he speaks it quite fluently, "Can I see the tulku?" a word they use for reincarnated master. And he said, "Yeah, sure." So he said he went out into this little garden area, and the kid was on he's 5 years old, on one of those little tricycles, plastic things that you ride around and stuff. And he said he was riding in a circle, just riding and riding and riding and riding. So he just sat down, didn't introduce himself. He just sat down, and then the little boy rode up to him on the trike and stopped at his feet and said, "Thurman, why did you leave me? Why couldn't you stay a monk?" And he said the look on the kid's face was like his teacher. He kind of screwed up his face and chastised him. And he said, in that moment, he really didn't know what to say other than to answer the question. He said, "Well, I thought it was valuable to become a professor, because then I could pass along the Dharma to more individuals." And he said, and it seemed like that answer mollified the 5-year-old. It went, "Okay," and then rode away. But he knew his name by his face. So when I read that article in the New York Times, I thought, oh my gosh, well if I'm going to find Luana, these guys probably know the way. So I began studying Tibetan philosophy, and I ended up going to Tibet with Robert Thurman and shooting a documentary, and we took a trip around Mount Kailash. And that will come back as a point of the story in a minute. But I was in Kailash with my camera equipment filming this documentary for Tibet House. And we just had a wonderful time, and Tibetan people are really fantastic. But as I got into the deepest part and the most profound part of the Buddhist philosophy, when it comes to reincarnation, and you're all familiar with the religions that believe in reincarnation and those that don't, right? And Buddhism has a belief in reincarnation, and Hinduism, and there's a few others that have that belief, right? But ultimately, when you get into the actual details of what happens in Buddhist philosophy, in death, you've probably all heard of the Bardo. The Bardo is what people, there's a book called the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You may have heard of that. And it's a book which is really like almost a dictionary of the stages of death. It's quite valuable to read if you have a relative who's passing away, because they're very accurate about the stages of death. Just the way, I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but the way a hospice nurse can tell you about the stages of death. It's one of those things we don't talk about. What was the woman's name who wrote the book, who was very famous about death and dying? She was the... Yes, that's right, Kubler-Ross. Very valuable to read that stuff, because when you have a loved one who's passing away, to know the stages, it's very valuable for you, because otherwise it's like, oh my God, now what's happening? So, the Tibetan Book of the Dead was written, actually it was orally translated in about the 8th century. And it was passed along orally for centuries and centuries before it was finally written into text form. And it's this very interesting and profound journey of a person dying and explaining all the stages, what you see, what you don't see, etc. Okay. In essence, the Buddhist theory is that between lives we're just smoke, like a wisp of smoke. That's the equivalent. And that depending upon our karma, you've all heard that term, depending our karma, the actions we've had in this previous life, that dictates who we're going to be in our next life. So, if you were a lousy person, or you were a murderer or a killer, you would have a rebirth in a lower realm, the way they put it. You might be a rat or a snake. Okay? That's the way that's their philosophy on it. And Hindu as well. But the idea that your karma dictates who you're going to be in your next life. But also that there is no fixed consciousness. Fixed meaning, when I think Luana came to visit me, well, Luana doesn't exist per se. So that must be in my imagination. So a little bit like Western science in that regard. And I had a problem with that, because if Luana was able to take me to the place that she resides now, then that means there is a form of consciousness of her that exists somewhere in the universe, and you can go there. That was my problem. That was my conundrum. Okay? So despite going into, and of course I'm not somebody who studied it for 30, 40, 50 years, and I'm sure Dr. Thurman would be happy to, refute everything I say. But in my case, I wasn't satisfied. And then I got an odd phone call from a friend of mine in London who said, I need you to come over and work on this show we're going to do in London. I said, that's fantastic. So, an old friend from high school, so he flew me over to London, and we went around and had all these meetings, and we had this great idea for a TV show, but there was nothing. If this happens all the time, We've got a great show for you to do, and there's no show. And so I was there really mumbling over, what am I doing here? I feel so bad, my friend spent all this money to bring me here. And then he introduced me to a friend of his, a gentleman named Robert Beer. Robert's an author who, most Tibetan books use his illustrations. He's an author and a painter who does incredible stuff. He's an Oxford professor. Okay? And when I shook his hand, I had that feeling, that coincidental feeling, that he was the reason that I was there. And I just honored it in my mind. Oh, okay, well, I'll stay in touch with him. So about 6 months went by, and he wrote me this email and that said his daughter had just passed away, 18 years old, and he was devastated by her death. And I was trying to find some way to give him solace in the research I'd been doing, and I had just read Carol Bowman's book, Children's Past Lives. Carol Bowman's a hypnotherapist who had studied with Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia. She studied with Brian Weiss, and she had written a book about kids remembering their past lives here in the U.S. And I thought this might give him some solace. And I sent it to him, and then he wrote to me and said, "Have you ever heard of Michael Newton?" Okay, no, I had not. So I picked up Journey of Souls. And the first chapter in Journey of Souls, it said, someone is remembering a between life moment, between lives, and they're in a classroom and everyone is dressed in white. And it's a classroom in spirituality. And when I read that, I said, oh, okay. This is what I'm supposed to figure out and understand, because there it is, the classroom. And so I, at that moment, thought, well, maybe this would be an interesting documentary. And so I contacted Michael Newton's organization, and Michael had retired. This was about 2005. No, maybe later, 2007. He'd retired, no longer gave interviews. I'd had it up to here with doing interviews. But they invited me to come and film their accreditation process. They were having a conference in Chicago. It's a week-long thing. So I packed up my camera and went there. And within a few minutes of meeting Michael Newton, he could see what kind of person I was or what I was about, and said, okay, I'll give you my last interview. So I filmed him for a couple of hours and talked to him about his life and his research and his work. Because the premise is very simple. He's saying 7,000 people under deep hypnosis say the same things about the afterlife. Either that's accurate or it's not. Very simple premise. If it is accurate, then I have to find out if it is or not, in my mind. That's what my documentary was going to set out to do. Is this accurate? And so I filmed him, and then I interviewed his wife. And that was important because she corroborated a number of things that he said. So I could say to her, you know, is it true that he didn't really go into bookstores for fear that a title or some concept would interfere with his question? And she said, yeah, that was accurate. So let me tell you about Michael Newton's work, for those of you who are not familiar with him. He was a psychologist here in the 1950s, 60s. And back in the 1950s, there was a famous case of a woman named, her name was, she was Irish. She remembered the lifetime of an Irish woman named Murphy. Bridie Murphy, thank you. I go to Sue. Sue knows. Bridie Murphy, according to this story, this woman remembered, and so it was a big sensation. Time magazine, Life, Look, they all did stuff on Bridie Murphy. And Michael Newton, who was working as a psychologist in Los Angeles, started getting phone calls. Would you do a past life regression? And he said, I don't believe in it. I just don't believe in it. He was a skeptic. He thought there was no value to it. So he refused. And then sometime in the early 60s, a client came into his office, and the guy had the shoulder pain that was no doctors could describe what it was. They just said it's psychosomatic. You need to go see a psychiatrist. You need to go under hypnosis. Then maybe you can find the source of your pain. So Newton had this guy on his couch, and during the course of his session, he said, take me to the source of your pain. And the guy said, oh, I'm a British soldier. It's World War I, the Battle of the Somme, and I've just been stabbed in the back by a German soldier. That's the pain, the searing pain. And Newton, because he was a skeptic, wouldn't believe him. So he started peppering him with questions. Oh, really? What's your mother's name? What was her maiden name? What's your unit? What street did you grow up on? What was your address? He went through all these things while the poor guy was lying on the ground being stabbed, as he put it. And at some point he did finally, help him out of that moment. But after the session, he wasn't satisfied with that. He contacted the British War Office and said, did this guy exist? And he got the message back, yes. This guy was in the 4th Corps, this was his name, rank, serial number, etc., etc. So in a way, Newton was dragged kicking and screaming into the past life regression movement. Like Brian Weiss. Brian Weiss, very similar, Yale psychiatrist, a client complaining of a psychosomatic illness. She remembers a past life where that illness was beset upon her in some fashion, and his clients are healed. So the two of them had that same, these two people, Brian Weiss and Michael Newton, had the same kind of journey to this work. However, in Newton's case, in the late 60s, a woman came in who was very depressed, and she was complaining she didn't know anybody, and it was a very lonely life, and she was basically suicidal. And so in the session he said, take me to the source of your pain, especially if there's a group involved. And she said, oh, I see. Okay, I'm with my soul group now, and we're all agreeing that we won't be together in this lifetime. And Newton said, your soul group, what are you talking about? She said, well, they're the people I normally incarnate with. They're all my closest and dearest friends, and I see them, I'm with them now. And so, do you want to close that? Yeah, please, go ahead. You guys, don't worry about it. If you want to interrupt me at any time, feel free. I should have done that. But anyway. Everyone's chattering over there. Yes, yes. And then what? Anyway. Sign of a good audience when they're like crying from freezing. And there's, go on! Tell the story! So there she was saying that she's with her soul group. Okay? And Newton says, well, when is this? Is this in the past? Is this a previous lifetime? Is it in the future? When is it? And she said, no, it's now. It's now. I'm with them now. I'm experiencing them now. I can see them all. And he said after the session, he kind of sat and stared at his wall and thought to himself, what is this? I know, I didn't believe in the other stuff. And now that there's some kind of a life between lives? But basically, he closed his practice, his public practice, and for the next 25 years, only interviewed people that could take him there. And he grilled them relentlessly. As you'll see if you look at the Journey of Souls, he's a relentless questioner. But basically, he got a map of the afterlife, not with all the details, just, the surface of the iceberg of the afterlife. So he got a chance to see all these things, and so 7,000 patients over the course of 30 years said pretty much the same thing about the journey. Okay? And because when I saw that, if what he was saying was true, then it would be profoundly change the way we view who we are on this planet. I saw that immediately. So now I'm there at the conference in Chicago, and I said, because now this is the big question, and science, as we know it, believes that hypnosis is not a valid scientific tool. I recently was at the University of Virginia speaking with a number of great professors, teachers there, including Bruce Grayson. He's the father of near-death experiences, PhD, and Jim Tucker, who wrote a book, Life After Life. Anyway, and their point was that, very simply, we don't believe that hypnosis is a valid tool because, we all know cases, the McMartin case, where people plant memories into your mind that you didn't have. That's the rap on hypnosis. But in Michael Newton's case, his sessions are 5 and 6 hours long, each one. And they ask neutral questions. His method is not to ask a leading question, but to ask the opposite of a leading question. Where are you now? What are you seeing? What are you sensing? What are you experiencing? Now, when I heard that, I thought, well, I can prove or disprove that immediately with a camera. You know, you can't hide that when you're leading someone. So I said, you know, could I film one of your sessions? And they were like, yeah, sure, go ahead. You know, we're doing some practice, we're doing a practice session today. Why don't you film that? Okay. So I sat in this conference room in Chicago, and there were about 100 people sitting around. And this woman who was a hypnotherapist who agreed to do a demonstration, and I interviewed her afterwards extensively. She had never had this past life memory that she's about to have. So it's not something she was bringing back up from a previous session. And first he went, and the process is very simple. They go through your life, the first hour or half hour. Sort of a deepening process of getting you to relax and be calm and et cetera, and then they go ask questions about your life, about when you were a kid, you know, and then usually they'll take you to some incident that happened at an early age, and that's partially to get you to speak out loud because you're experiencing the visuals, you're seeing and remembering from your mind, and sometimes with great clarity, something that happened when you were a kid, and while you're experiencing that thing that happened, you know, they're asking you questions to give details. What color was the door that you grew up with, the house you grew up in? What's your first memory? And then they'll ask this question of saying, so, and at what point did you arrive in your mother's womb? Which most people would say, I'm sorry? What do you mean? What do you mean by that? What time did you arrive in your mother's womb? And everyone answers the question. I'm startled. You know, people say August. It's always after the 4th month. And the answer for that is because up until the 4th month, there's nothing to do there. It's more like a fish. So that's what people report. And again, this is not a philosophy I'm espousing. It's just what people say under deep hypnosis about the journey. Okay? So in this woman's case, then they ask the question, let's go to a previous lifetime that has some effect on this lifetime. Now you're free to say no, you're free to say there isn't such a thing, but people do remember a previous lifetime. And in this case, she remembered being naked and in a gas chamber in Auschwitz. And she remembered this woman's name, and she remembered all the details about this woman. And then they usually stop, especially when it's a stressful memory, and they'll say, well, let's go back to a happier time in this life. What do you remember? So she went back to her childhood in Warsaw, and her whole family, she named all these people, and I was able to find them in the Holocaust records of Auschwitz, quite extensive. And then we went through her life up to the point when, you know, the family got rounded up and taken to Auschwitz. And I'm listening like a hawk because I'm a filmmaker and I know how to create a story. And I know what an actor does to create a story. And I can see it from a mile when somebody's making something up. Or they're telling a story that they're answering questions that are out of, you know, it's based on syntax. When you answer, when you're remembering something, and I'm asking you details about it, you remember it in such a fashion of what I ask you, as opposed to somebody who's making up a story which has a beginning, middle, and an end, or then I went, and then I happened, and this. So she was very specifically answering these questions, and then she, you know, experiences her death, and rising up out of her body, and then traveling back to this wonderful place that everyone who tells these stories or has this experience reports going back home. She wanted to go home. And when she got home, she was there with her soul group, and she was there with her spirit guide, and she was there laughing again and talking about great experiences, and she went around and got to see some of her loved ones, and she also saw the family that she had lost. She saw all of them, and the experience of seeing them is the same experience we're having now. You feel like you're sitting in a chair and looking at your loved one or holding their hand or touching them. So well, you could argue whether it's true or not, it's the same experience. And then this is where it got really kind of unusual and profound for me, and it really altered my mind, which is, and then at some point, everyone has kind of the same journey. They see their soul group, they might go to a life selection process to see why they chose to be this person. Sometimes they go to a healing center. People describe that. And then usually, and not always, but sometimes people then go to what they can only describe as a council. And they're usually 6 to 12 individuals. Usually only one speaks, but people describe there's 6 people there, or we're out in a grove, and it's a beautiful sunlight, and everyone's sitting around a table, and they're waiting for me. Or I'm it's almost like Greek cathedral, and they're all standing around, and there's 8 people there, and I can see who they are, and sometimes they actually wear medallions that people describe. I kid you not. Anyway, at some point now she's there in front of her council of elders, and she then asks the question, why? Why? Why did I choose such a difficult life? Actually, she said it like this. I'm asking them, because we didn't hear her speak, she said, I'm asking them why I chose such a difficult life. And then she said, oh, okay, they're showing me these images. I know this is going to be hard to hear, but they're showing me images that it was harder to play the role of a perpetrator than a victim in this life. My head shot up from the camera. I just heard the most politically incorrect sentence I'd ever heard in my life. I really looked around the room to look like, who are these people? Did she just say it was harder to choose the role of a Nazi? How could you? But then as she explained it, and as I filmed other people and more people, I found this story to be over and again, this idea that we choose our lifetimes the way you would choose a role in a play, that we choose our costumes the way we choose costumes in a play. We choose our props the same way we choose props backstage. And we go out and we do these scenes with people, and some of the people in the stage are our friends. They already know, you kind of know what they're supposed to do. They don't always do it. Actors aren't always great. But they play those roles, and then at the end there's a death scene. And some of them are fantastic. Some of them are really tragic, but also really well done. You've all had that experience, where you're sitting in a theater and you're crying over watching some play that you've seen 100 times. I went to see West Side Story in New York, the revival. And, Ti amo, Tony. And I'm there, like, crying. And I'm thinking to myself, I've seen this movie since I was 12. What am I crying about? And then I realized, oh, I see, I'm experiencing, they're showing me an emotion that I can experience, and I don't even have to be there. Wow, that's a little bit like what they're saying. Because what they say, under deep hypnosis, is that only about a third of our energy comes here. 2/3 of our energy are always back there. Hanging out with our soul group, going to classes. Hence why she could be in the doctor's chair and experience being together with her friends at the same time, because they are there. Hence why when people say, oh, I had a near-death experience and I saw all these dead people that I know, but weirdly enough, I also saw people I know that are alive. Because only a third of our energy shows up here at any given lifetime. Okay, again, I know what I'm saying sounds a little bit out there. I'm just reporting what people say under deep hypnosis. So I heard what this woman had to say. I heard that thing, and then I interviewed her afterwards, and I confirmed for my sanity that she was not making any of it up. And then I started filming more people, and I went around and I filmed a number of different sessions during this conference. I saw a woman who had severe aquaphobia cure her aquaphobia during this session, where she went into a previous life where she had been a sailor and she drowned, and once she got back up into the life between lives, she saw why she chose that life, and she saw that the man who drowned her was her father in this life. But in there, she saw him come to her and say, "Oh, you have no idea how hard it was to do that to you." And then she realized she had asked him to. It was their contract, or their agreement, not contract, that's too set in stone, but their agreement. Wow. So then, after that, they said, "Well, how about you, Rich? Would you like to try one?" And I thought, okay, well, I'm no longer a journalist at that moment. But it's my perfect opportunity to prove it wrong. Because I cannot be manipulated into remembering something I didn't remember. At least I don't think I can be. And plus, I'm jaded enough and skeptical enough that I had determined that if they asked me, "What do you see?" and I don't see anything, I would say that ad infinitum until we stopped. I don't see anything. I was going to say that for an hour if I had to. But it was the next day, and so I sat down and I wrote out like 10, and I'm very, I'm aware of this camera at all times. I know where it is at all times. It's my job, okay? I know what angle this is. I'm completely, my conscious mind is over there at all times whenever there's a camera on. So I know that it would be very difficult to hypnotize me because my brain is always, running around thinking about other stuff. So I didn't think there was any way that anyone could hypnotize me, let's put it that way. I was under the misconception that hypnosis is being under, that, you were going to go out. Well, that's not it at all. How many of you have done a guided meditation? Or, yoga class where they say, picture yourself in a happy, blah, blah, blah. It's identical. It's just 6 hours of it. And at some point, you feel comfortable and relaxed enough to just say what's in your mind, even though your conscious mind is saying, "What?" Okay. So I'll give you my own experience because, well, you're here. You're trapped. The door's closed. So now I make out a list of questions as they tell you to do that. Come up with some questions you'd like to ask. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. I get to ask questions, whatever they are, the deepest question I can come up with the night before. But I also threw in a trick question because I thought, I'm going to throw in a question that no one knows the answer to but me. And I will know for sure if this person tries to lead me to it because he can't know the answer. And the question was, when I was in Santa Monica about 6 months prior to this, have you ever woken up from a dream and you hear like a voice or something, or as you're falling asleep you hear like some voice or something, and then you go, "What was that?" Well, in this case, as I was waking up, I heard someone speak to me in Latin. I don't speak Latin. I don't know Latin. But I wrote it down. I wrote down this phrase, "Vanum populatum." And then I forgot about it. I got up with my day, had my coffee, and then, maybe a week later, I was cleaning up and I saw the note, "Vanum populatum." Okay, well, I'll look that up. So I went to my local, computer, Googled it, found the Latin dictionary. Vanum. Oh, it is a Latin word. How about that? It means vanity. Okay. What sentence is this going to be? Populatum. What could that be? Look it up. To annihilate completely, to utterly destroy, to wipe off the face of the earth. Wow. Annihilate vanity. I live in LA. Where do I begin? But then it's also like, well, wait a second. Who's talking to me? Who's talking to me in this other language? And I had this weird feeling that it was myself talking to me. And that made me think, well, wait a minute, was I like a Roman in a past life or something? I mean, is that possible? And because it's a language I don't speak. And if, I mean, is that the language of the ancients? That doesn't make sense, because you've got Sanskrit and all these other languages, you know. Was I dumb back in those days that I would think that today I would understand it? I mean, the concept of why I thought that I would understand a language I don't understand, a dead language. Why not talk to me in English? If it's me talking to me, that's as far as I could get with that conundrum, right? Just wrestled around with it. Okay, that's my question. What's the meaning of Vanum Populatum? And by the way, I did have a moment of clarity, which was, oh, destroy the ego. We've all heard that. That's a Zen Buddhist philosophy. The essence of it means that the ego is always changing, and that to annihilate it, you sort of realize that it's never static, and that it's always, you know, moving. It's never the same. That's a little different. But this is annihilate things that are vain, that are of vanity, cars and fame, money, wealth, stuff, vanity, our perception of what is cool, our perception of what is beautiful, what is rich. And not just like point out how goofy that is. That's not the sentence. Point out how goofy that is. Annihilate it! Okay, all right. So I had at least that. So I knew that it meant something deeper, which was, you know, about, but it was like a Buddhist philosophical point that, you know, I couldn't quite get my mind around, but at the same time, you know, somebody said it to me. Okay. So now I go to this session, and the guy who conducted the session, his name is Jimmy Quast, and Jimmy works for the Newton Institute doing accreditation. So if you're somebody who's been doing hypnotherapy for years, Jimmy's the guy who looks at all of your paperwork, and also they listen to an actual tape of you doing a session to make sure you're not just making it up, you know. Anyway, so he's quite good at what he does. And by the way, he was a skeptic as well. He didn't believe Michael Newton. He thought Michael Newton was nuts. I mean, he was a therapist, but he thought Life Between Lives, and then he was doing a session, and in the session, the woman said, oh, by the way, you're going to go work for Michael Newton. They're telling me here that you need to go work for him because he knows what he's talking about. In the middle of a session. He said, it's not something you forget, you know, when somebody else's spirit guide tells them to tell you to go do something. Anyway, so in Jimmy's case, he spent about an hour sort of just relaxing my mind, you know, putting me on a beach somewhere. And then he asked me to go back into my life, and I remembered specifically an incident of when I cut my finger with an axe. And there was, you know, blood pouring out of it, and I had almost chopped it off. I was trying to make a bow and arrow set. I was going to prove to my parents that I could make my own bow and arrow. I didn't buy one. But I pulled the axe this way. It just went right through my finger. But then I saw my father come out of the house with the bandages. And that feeling of seeing my dad, who had just passed away, you know, it's a couple of years before that, you know, oh my God, he's here to save me. That feeling that you have as a kid, you know, safety. Very powerful. But so I felt that I was in touch with it. I mean, I really could feel it. Plus I could see the cars in the driveways in the house, and then the cars across the street. And I could identify, oh, that's a 1960 blah, blah, blah. You know, so everything was right about the memory, let's put it that way. And then, so then he said, what's your first memory? And I said, and I had the experience of suddenly rushing out into a bright lit room, and I said, I'm being born. Now I know people, we may all know somebody who remembers being born. I didn't. But I was there, and the doctor was, his face was as clear as my face is. I could see his hazel eyes, I could see his glasses, I could see that goofy thing they used to wear back in the 50s. You know, he had a mask on, and a mask on his head. The odd thing was, I could see that he was holding me up like this by my feet. But I saw him right side up. But clear as a bell. And I said, oh, my father's not here, but he's on his way here. That was a detail I did not know, but confirmed it with my mom after the session. So then Jimmy says, all right, let's go to a previous lifetime that has some significance in this lifetime. And I was not going to go. So I just kept saying, it's black, it's pitch black, I don't see anything. And I was determined. I was not going to see anything or, you know, try to make something up for him. And he would just say, okay, that's fine. So, you know, just look around you. You see anything? No, I don't see anything. And then he said, this is one of their tricks, just look down. And in my mind's eye, I looked down, oh, I could see my feet. But they were barefoot. And then I saw I was standing in a creek. And I said, oh, I can see my feet, they're all cut up. But I'm standing in a creek. And then as I, you know, then he asked, what are you wearing? And it was like I pulled back. And I could see I was in buckskin. And then I laughed. Oh, I'm an American Indian. And I could see that I had long black hair, or this vision of me, whether it was me or not, you know, I don't know. Long black hair with feathers in it. And so I said, you know, I got these 2 feathers hanging down. And he said, what's your occupation? I said, well, I'm a holy man. I'm a medicine guy. I go out and get medicine for the tribe. And in this particular instance, there was a war party that was about to happen, so I was getting the kind of herbs you need to cure people. And as I'm saying it, I'm thinking, what? What are you saying? My conscious mind is going, oh, you're a screenwriter, you're making this up. But, you know, the admonition is just let yourself speak. And then he said, can we go visit your tribe? And I said, I don't want to do that. And then I saw why, because they were all dead. They had all been massacred. You know, I just saw bodies everywhere lying down, you know, blood. And I said, they've all been killed. And then I saw myself, my mind's eye went to a teepee. And I could feel that leather, you know, and pulling the flap open and looking down and seeing a woman lying there, long black hair, and her throat had been cut. And I said, they've killed my wife and they've taken my son. And as I said it, I felt the emotion of that. That full emotion of what that would feel like for someone to say that. And I was thinking to myself, if you're making this up, why are you feeling this? How can you be experiencing this kind of pain? You know, sobbing. And then why would I say that my son was gone? Because there was no son there. You know, unless I was gilding the lily in some way. You know, as a screenwriter, I'm always thinking about it. Then he asked me what happened. I said, oh, you know, it was an ego thing between their chief and our chief, and it escalated out of control, and look what happened. And he said, who was responsible for this? And I said, it was the goddamn Huron. Now, and he asked me what my name was, and I said, it sounds like Tatanka. Now, I saw Dances with Wolves. Tatanka is a Lakota Sioux word which means buffalo, okay? And I laughed to myself, oh, that's funny. Because you saw that movie, you're going to make yourself a Lakota Sioux. That's what you are. I said, but it's not Tatanka, it sounds like it, it's Watanka. And I even laughed at myself for that, because it was like, you can't even make up the word right. You know, you're obviously not getting this story correct. So, when I said the goddamn Huron, I was laughing at myself as well, because the Huron are in upstate New York, and the Lakota are in Montana. I mean, come on, dude, if you're going to write this story, you know, make sense. Then he said, let's go to the last day. Oh, by the way, so about 6 months after that, I was at a funeral in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. My aunt had passed away, and I was sitting at a table with one of my cousins, and I said, what are you doing these days? And he said, well, I'm a historian. Really? For who? For what? What do you write about? I write about the Lakota Sioux. They made me an honorary member of their tribe. You're kidding me. Well, can I describe this thing that happened to me? I mean, I don't know if it's real or not, but you tell me. And he said, well, wait, before you say anything, did you have any feathers? And I said, yeah, I had 2. He said, were they up or were they down? He did that gesture, you know, were they up, down? And I said, they were down. He said, well, that means you were a medicine man, because that's the way they wore their clothing. I said, oh, that's unusual. All right, well, then why did I say that my name was Watanka? He said, because Wakantanka means the Great Spirit, and that would be an abbreviation of that, and that would be what they called you, because you're the Great Spirit guy, Watanka. Okay, well then why did I say that, you know, that had the Huron were involved? He said, because you're sitting in the spot where they fought for 60 years, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. Those are all details that I did not know and could not find on the internet, because I looked them up. But they were all confirmed independently by someone who, you know, just happened to tell me that story. Okay, so then in the session he said, let's go to the last day of your life. And I saw myself walking along, looked like an old boardwalk, by a river, and I could see this like a raging river going by. I want to say the Mississippi. And he said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I came to kill myself. And I've drunk a bottle of whiskey, and I'm now going to step into the river and let myself go. And I saw myself bobbing like a cork, you know, down the river, whoosh, real quickly. And Jimmy said, so how are you feeling? Is this like a really, you know, is this sad for you? Or I said, no, 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 no. I'm a shell of a human. I just want to go home. And then I said, they took everything from me. They took my family, they took my culture, they took my religion, they took everything I believed in. What's the point of sticking around here for? And as I said it, I was thinking, wow, listen to you, Mr. Drama. You know, well, that's a good sentence. I might want to use that in a movie sometime. But anyways, that's what I said. And then I saw myself going into deep space somewhere. And out of this darkness came like a mist. And then as the mist got closer, it turned into people. And there were about 20, 30 people there. And they all seemed to know me. And they all seemed happy to see me. I did not recognize any of them. But I said that, you know, well, there's a whole group of people there. And then out of the center of the group came this fella who was in his 60s with green eyes. And I said, oh, this is my spirit guide. This is my, like, eternal teacher. But in Newton's books, when people meet that person, they usually are in sort of awe of their teacher. But I felt like he was an old pal of mine. That was just our weird relationship. And so he asked me, my spirit guide, said, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I think we should go to the healing center. And I saw myself and I described this kind of unusual room where you could pull all the energy and your previous energy that you left behind into you in this room. And I felt myself like almost like a transporter room in Star Trek, sort of going up and down this energetic recreation. And then suddenly I felt, you know, like somebody who had taken 20 cups of coffee, recharged, you know, the way I'm speaking now, not. Speaking with full command of the language in full paragraphs about really complex things. And so the first place I wanted to go was I said I want to go find my soul group. I want to find the people in my group. And I was now in a classroom, okay? But not with Luana, but in a classroom. And I recognized the teacher, who was my friend. And I said, oh, there's my friend, saying her name. And this is a classroom in energy reconstruction. And Jimmy said, well, describe that. What is it? I said, well, everyone goes through life with, I can only describe them as geometric shapes that carry all of the past life memories and emotions that you've had in all your incarnations. And they travel with us. You can't see them, but they're around us at all times. And we access them in moments of need, in moments of difficulty, because we've gone through this before. And that between lives, when we come back here, we clean them up because they pick up pieces of call it negative energy along the way, and they need to be cleaned up. And this is a classroom in energy reconstruction. I'm telling you, I have never heard of what I'm saying. Never heard of such a thing. It didn't make any sense to me while I was saying it, but as I spoke it, I felt like I understood it completely. And then when I looked at all the interviews I had done, I found that people were talking about these geometric shapes in quite a few interviews that carry this information. One person called them fractals. Another person called them engrams, carrying bits of information that have to do with all your lifetimes. And I said they function as ball bearings. I don't even know what a ball bearing is. I mean, I know what it is, but I've never seen it work. But I said they function like a ball bearing, where you put it in a machine and the machine functions better because it's there. Parts move. And then Jimmy said, well, where do you want to go next? And I said, well, I want to go see Luana. And boom! Now, the weird part about that was, the classroom that I went into, everyone, there was like 20 kids in there. I want to say kids, you know, they were like young, and there was my friend, the teacher. And they all turned around and it was like, oh, teacher's friend is here. Like, oh, wow, that's cool. And they're all listening to me. I'm talking to Jimmy, but they're watching me talk to Jimmy. So I'm in the back of the room, and I'm saying, oh, this is my friend Kajira was her name, and then this is what she does, and da-da-da-da-da. Okay? But now when I go to Luana's classroom, I see Luana in the back of the classroom wearing a ponytail. She's about 20 years old, which is about 20 years before I met her. And she looks up, and her instant thing is like, what are you doing? What are you here? Why are you here? And I'm, as if I walked through this door and appeared here, and the class all stops and looks at me like, who are you? And I start talking, and you can imagine what that must be like in a classroom like at Harvard or something, you know. Suddenly a guy's in there, and then blah, blah, blah. So they're looking at me like, who, you're talking, like why? You know, so it was like a very hostile, I mean, hostile's not the right word, but it was like irritated by this, you know, goofball who had showed up and is talking away. And so Jimmy says, well, what's the classroom? And I said, well, first of all, I want to say I feel a little uncomfortable talking. However, I'm here. So, this is a classroom in healing. And what they do here is these are the people who help the individual healers back on earth when they're about to do an operation or do a shamanic ritual or whatever the religion or whatever the healing is that they're going to do. These people help focus the healing light of the universe down into the client, into the patient. And one of the students turns around and goes, you don't know what you're talking about. And I thought, oh, this is funny. You know, if I'm making this up, why am I criticizing myself? But then I said, okay, take it easy. I said, you know, he's saying, what they're saying is that I'm saying it in a very sophomoric way. It's I'm giving a simple explanation. It's much more complicated because there is what you might call the karma of the client, the patient, and the karma of the doctor. Not karma as an action of bad things we did, but karma in terms of like what you're here to learn, what you're here to do. So the patient who might want to experience an illness, so they can go through what that illness is like and the effect of even passing away and how it affects, so they want to experience the energy of that. So they're not going to be cured that day. And the doctor may have signed up not to cure everybody that they work with, as we know. They don't save everybody. So there's a lot more complicated, a myriad of reasons why anything happens. It's not as simple as I just said it, which seemed to mollify them on some level. And Luana comes up to me and is like, what are you doing? And I said, she goes, are you on a TV show or something? Like, what are you doing? And I said, no, I'm doing this. You know, I didn't get into the whole thing. I came to find you, you know, but I said, no, I'm in this session, I'm doing a thing. And that, you know, that seemed to amuse her to no end. She was laughing. And so then Jimmy said, all right, where do you want to go next? You know, and of course, even though this is a 4 or 5 hour session, you know, you want to be there. You don't want to split, you know, you're there. So I said, oh, I want to go see my counsel. Okay. So now we go before the counsel, and I got my list of questions. But again, the night before, they had told me we're going to do this. I sat down, you know, the night before, and I went, like any one of us would. Okay, 10 questions I could ask God. What are they? You know, what's this? What's that? Blah, 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 blah. Okay, put it away. And now I give it to the therapist, and I assume he's going to ask me the questions. But that's not how it happens. How it happens is I go, oh, I'm going to ask my questions now. And then in my mind's eye, I have my list of questions that I'm imparting to them mentally. No one's saying them. As if I had memorized them. How could I know all 10 of them? I don't know, but I knew them all. I knew all the questions. And so the first question was, what's the meaning of Bonum Populata? And the council roared with laughter. That's great! And then the lead guy looks at me and says, why don't you ask Rich? He knows the answer to that. And as he said, Rich, an image appeared of me off over to the side of myself lying on the couch with Jimmy, you know, what the camera would see. And in that moment I realized two things. One was that he was addressing my eternal self. He wasn't addressing Rich. Otherwise he would have said, you already know the answer to that. He said, why don't you ask Rich, the temporary you, who's on the couch? He already knows the answer to that. Okay? So then one sentence he's confirmed that he's talking to the higher version of me, not the static, eternal self. There is no such thing. We're always changing. We're always learning. Each lifetime we learn. Just like here, we're always learning and learning and learning. Back there, we're always learning as well. Always, always. So you're never static. So that's accurate. It's just that he was speaking to another person who happens to have my consciousness. Okay? A higher version of me. Let's call it that because he's wittier than I am. And the second thing I realized when that question was that I had given Rich that puzzle in Latin, knowing that he would look it up and then understand it. But if I had said it to him in English, he'd never hear it. Annihilate vanity. What? Bonum populatum. Oh. He'd know that I'd Google it. And once I Googled it, I have to think about it. And once I thought about it, I'd figure out what it meant. Wow. So that was an interesting answer. I not only saw that there was an eternal version of me, but that eternal version of me had given myself that puzzle. Okay. And then I went through about these other 10 questions, all of really interesting and fascinating and blah, blah, blah. But then I got to the question that relates to us, to why you're here tonight. And this is the key question. And this is why you're here tonight. Because I asked this question. And the question was, what do you think it was? Anybody? Why did I choose Rich Martini? Why did I choose you? Why did I choose me? And the answer relates to all of us. And it was pretty simple, but at the same time pretty complex. And the answer was, every thought, action, word, or deed contains energy. Every time you write a song, anytime someone hears that song, they get the energy of that artist who created it or wrote it and the person who sang it. Or musically, the person who wrote those notes, what their intent was, you experience the energy of that. Every time you write a book or read a book, you feel that character, you feel those characters, you feel the intent of that author on some level. Every time you read an email, every time you send an email, some part of you is in the email. You know, it's the same thing when you call someone on the phone, and the moment they hear your voice, if it's a loved one, they have that visceral sensation of love. They don't even know why they love hearing your voice, but they do, right? And we all know that from our own parents, the sound of their voice, or the sound of a distant relative you haven't seen in a long time. There's something about the tonality or just the notes of their voice that goes right through you. You can really feel it. Well, that's a subtle form of what I'm talking about. Every thought, action, word, or deed contains energy. And the reason I chose Rich is because I know that comedy can cure someone instantly through one laugh. You can change a person's disposition by getting them to laugh one time. As a filmmaker, I chose to be a filmmaker because, and you haven't seen any of my films, but for a number of my films are comedies. And going into a theater and hearing people laugh at the joke that you wrote, there's something that is very healing about that experience. And then I said, tears have the same effect, however, they require catharsis. Interesting, as I was saying it, I thought, well, that's interesting, I never thought about that, but you know, catharsis means you you experience the sadness of the moment, and then you cry, and then you're really sad, and then you come out on the other side of that sadness with the knowledge of like, oh, okay, well, thank God I don't have to experience that again. You know, or I feel so bad for that person or whatever. Okay? And then I said, I just wish that I had chosen, I said something to the effect of, I just wish that Rich was better at it. Meaning, you know, he was more successful as a filmmaker. I chose him because I thought it would be an idea, an outside-the-box way to heal people. I just wish he was better at it. Meaning, you know, and so they all laughed, which was kind of funny, you know, because, so I'm getting a laugh from my counsel, who's laughing at the fact that I'm mocking myself. And then I get a laugh from Jimmy, who was sitting there, and he laughed at the same time. So I was, this weird experience getting laughs in two different planes, simultaneously. Okay? So, but that idea that we choose ourselves so that we can heal other people. So, and then when I came out of that session, I felt like I had taken the red pill, you know, like they do in the movie The Matrix. Suddenly all reality seemed different for me. Every religion that I had ever experienced or heard about seemed different. Not wrong, per se. That would be inaccurate. But like shadows on a wall, or looking through a glass darkly. That those religious concepts of love your neighbor as yourself, we've heard that so many times. But it's more, it's deeper. It's love your neighbor as yourself because your neighbor is yourself. You come from the same cosmic energy. Back between lives, we're all happy. We're all without any kind of concept of sin. People do things that are, certainly they do things that they regret, that alter other people's stuff, and they wish they hadn't done it. When they get back there, they punish themselves, according to this research. Or, in extreme cases, people get punished, meaning, let's say they've had many lifetimes where they just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And then it's like, don't you think it's time you isolated yourself a little bit from the rest of people? And people voluntarily go into an isolation of some sort. Michael Newton writes about it. But the really wonderful thing about this research is to discover that this part, this polarity that we're in now, this is where good and evil exists. It doesn't exist back there. At least that's the way the research goes. It's a little hard to get your mind around, but let me just say a couple of things, which are, so I continued filming. So I wrote the book, Flipside, and the book is 15 different sessions that I filmed. 2 of them are mine, because 2 years later I did another session because I couldn't help but think I must have made that up. Because my brain is like anybody else's. You just can't believe something so fantastical. So I did another session, and it was like 6 hours. And it was as if I had never left, as if the story continued on, and it went deeper and in more places. And then, like I said, I filmed other people. But since the book has come out and since the documentary is finished, I have continued to film people because, you know, it's such an interesting topic. And recently I filmed a woman who was a skeptic, somebody who said to me, I'm interested in your story, in your book and everything, and I want to try that. I want to go do the Life Between Life session. And by the way, the guy who did the session with her, his name is Scott DeTamble. He's located in Claremont. He's unbelievable. So quite a few of the sessions that I filmed with him. And I did my second session with him. And if you go online and look up YouTube, Martini, Flipside, you'll find him doing a session live. I was at a book reading and a woman burst into tears and he asked if she wanted to work on something, and so he did a live demonstration of a Between Life session right there. So that was kind of interesting. But anyway, so this woman said to me, I'll go and do a session, but I want you to know I don't believe that I'll ever be hypnotized, and I don't believe in anything you're saying. And I said, so why are you doing it? She said, well, I'm having an operation. coming up. I have a tumor on an ovary, and I'm afraid that, you know, maybe there's some spiritual reason for this or something in my psyche I'm not aware of, and maybe talking to my subconscious will help me access that. So it's worth it for me just to do that. Okay, great. So we went out to Scott's, and I was kind of on the edge of my seat because I was afraid, you know, it happens sometimes where you go in and you just can't look down. You just can't do it. And I haven't experienced it, but I know people have, you know, and they go in, they, you know, spend a couple hours and they just can't get past, you know, that he's asking them something, you know. Do you remember this? No, I don't remember anything. But in her case, she quickly remembered a life in 1820, and she was an old cranky cowboy and married to a younger woman. And now this cranky cowboy had gotten to be older, and then they were out in the buckboard, and the girl asked him to stop to get her some water, and when he got out of the buckboard, she took off and left him to die out there, and he was dying. So when we came upon him, and I, by the way, while I was doing the session, I was able to Google this story, the town in Arizona. All these details were actually accurate. I don't know about the guy's name, but I was able to get the town and all that stuff. But anyway, and then, very unusual, this whole session, she, so then the old cranky cowboy dies, and then Scott says, so, you know, what are you experiencing now? She said, well, I feel myself stepping outside of him, and I'm this young girl. And what's your emotion? Are you sad? And she said, no, I always wanted to be a cranky old man, and I did it. She was ecstatic. And then she went back to her soul group, and the soul group were like 6 individuals who she said were all very young in spirit, but when she came upon them, they were playing a game of cosmic tag. Now, Newton has mentioned these before, people playing games. And so Scott said, well, describe this game. And she said, well, it's like hide and seek, but there's some added benefits to it, which is one is you're invisible. So you have to find all 5 friends simultaneously, but they're invisible, and they can go to any different realm. It doesn't have to be in this realm, it could be in another one. What? It was like, you know, as I'm listening to it, it was so cosmically deep, you know, and knowing this person, who she is, I mean, I thought, wow, she, you know, if she's making this up, it's really good. But anyway, so she gets to a point where she gets to meet her spirit guide, who's a bit of a curmudgeon, the way he talks to her and the way he relates to her. I thought it was kind of funny. But so she had, you know, a few questions, but they were written from a skeptic's point of view. So her 3 questions were this. What's the meaning of the shift? Now, you know, the shift in consciousness, people have been talking about it in New Age literature, you know, that the world is going through some kind of a shift, earthquakes, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Nobody knows what that is. But she had heard it, so she asked that question. What's the meaning of the shift? The second question was, is the universe a machine? Does it work like a machine, the universe? Interesting. And the third question was, what or who is God? I thought, wow, this is great. You know, if they could get these answers. But anyway, so the curmudgeonly spirit guide said, in terms of the cosmos, the current shift that's happening is not that big of a deal. He said, where we are, we call it the quickening. Whatever that means. He said, however, if you want to understand a shift in consciousness, imagine yourself a crab walking on the ocean floor. And suddenly you open your eyes and realize you're in an ocean. That's a shift in consciousness. And I was thinking about that because I was thinking about how, you know, H2O, I mean, what is water? When you're in the water, you think fish are aware that they're in water? Probably not. The same way we're not aware that oxygen, O2, is what we're sharing at all times. In, you know, that process. We can't see it, but it's certainly what keeps us alive. I thought, well, that's an interesting shift in consciousness. The second question was, he said, yes, the universe is a machine. However, it's a mechanism that's sentient. Meaning, when you learn something, the universe learns it. And if you've ever heard of that concept of the 100th monkey, that it's a scientific experiment where they discovered that if 100 monkeys learn a particular tool, all the monkeys on the planet suddenly know it. So if a monkey in South America learns a particular talent or an ability, and there's a quantum physics law that has to do with this, I forget the name of it, some kind of entanglement, that a monkey somewhere else in another continent learns this same unusual ability. So that idea that the universe is a mechanism that is sentient follows that, meaning, you know, something happens and we all eventually learn it. Okay? I thought that was pretty interesting. And then, what or who is God? I'm on the edge of my seat like, wow, you know, God is a small guy who lives in Schenectady. No, he says, God is beyond the capacity of the human brain to comprehend. However, you can experience God if you open your heart to everyone and to all things. Now, just take that apart for a second. God's beyond the capacity of the human brain to comprehend. Okay, on one level you could say, well, that's kind of condescending, like we're not bright enough to figure this one out, all right? But he's very precise in saying the capacity of the human brain to comprehend God, okay, too difficult. However, you can experience God, which is, what's the difference between knowing and experiencing? If you can experience something, then you know it, right? Isn't that correct? So the way to experience God is to open your heart to everyone. Now, what does that include? That includes everyone. And what does opening your heart mean? It means dropping your, bless you. It means blessing people when they sneeze. No, it means dropping your defenses. It means taking judgment off the table. An extremely difficult task to try, because we spend all day with judgment. Oh, that person's a kind of scary looking homeless person, I better walk the other side of the street. Or, oh, that person, they're telling me that that's a terrorist and I gotta hate that person. You know, there's certainly the logic of being, maintaining your being alive. But opening your heart to everyone, that's something else. And to all things, which then brings the environment into play. Your car, your house, your chair. I mean, what is it other than atoms agreeing to occupy a space at the same time? We know that. Everything is vibrational energy. So opening your heart to everyone and to all things at the same time. And who wouldn't want to experience that? So, in a nutshell, I continue the research because it's fascinating. And I do these sort of public talks because I always feel like there's no coincidence when you run into somebody, no matter where you are on the planet. It happened to me when I was on Saipan, where I started talking to somebody and I think, oh, this is why I'm here. Or Robert Beer. And by the way, let me go back to Robert Beer for a second. He's the guy who lost his daughter, and he told me to read Michael Newton. In his session, so I did a session, I did this research. I filmed Michael Newton, and I wrote to Robert, and I said, Robert, I don't know if you believe in psychics or any of that stuff. I don't know if you've been trying to reach your daughter, who had passed away. And unbeknownst to me, he had gone to some great psychics in England, and they have a tradition there where they don't charge any money, so that takes that out of the mix. But no one was able to help him. And so he had already scheduled a meeting with a Michael Newton trained therapist. And I was saying, you should try this. So he did. And can I tell you, he had the experience, whether it's real or not, doesn't make a difference, because it feels real, where he spent an hour with his daughter. And she showed him all the lifetimes they've had together. And she showed him the manner of his death in this lifetime, to show him, what their path has been and where it's going. But when he had his session, he remembered very clearly being a banker in 1840 in Boston. And he described, you know, what he looked like and the streets he lived in. I used to live in Boston, so it all rang true to me. But he had been married to a woman, let's say her name's Elizabeth. He was married to Elizabeth in Boston, but as he described it to me, he had met Elizabeth when he was a young man here, you know, here on the planet. And they had been together for a short amount of time. But obviously they had soulmates on some level, okay? And in this lifetime, they were married, she died, it destroyed him, and eventually he died of alcoholism. So when he wrote me about that, I said, well, wait a second, are you still friends with Elizabeth? He said, yeah. She's married, she lives in the States. I said, well then, would you do me a favor? Don't tell her anything about your session, and we'll arrange for her to have a session. You know, do you think you could, you know, might be able to swing that? And he was like, yeah. So this woman went to a therapist that I chose in New York City without knowing anything about Robert's journey. And she had the identical past life memory, being married to him in the 1840s in Boston. In terms of science, there's no odds for that. It also proves that it can't be cryptomnesia or something you heard or read in a book. And it can't be that you're tapping into some unconscious energy in the, you know, in the universe that contains all past life memories. It just, none of that makes sense in the face of that evidence. Okay? So, now we've come to the question, why did you choose to be you? And why did you choose to be here tonight? And you don't have to answer it now, but it's something to think about. Why did you choose to be you? And, you know, a lot of times it's like, what, are you crazy? I would never choose these parents. You know, these parents were there, they tortured me. You know, in my case, I had really wonderful parents. Really, I was really lucky. You know, I didn't know that until I went around the world and saw, you know, the kind of torture that people have. But then once you get to this thing that the stones in your path may have actually been put there by you so that you could overcome them. And when you actually get to see someone, a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, an uncle. Just one other quick story. A close friend of mine from grade school read the book and said, I want to try this. And so she flew out from New York City, and we drove out to Scotty. And on the way there, she said, Richard, I have two things about me you don't know. One is my father molested me sexually when I was a little girl, and I never told you this. And my brother committed suicide. He was a drug addict. He overdosed. And those two issues have been hugely important in my life and my therapy and everything. And, you know, probably account for the way I am today. Neither one of which I knew. And so I said to her, oh, you know, I'm terribly sorry to hear that, but, you know, maybe you can examine this at some level. And so when she went out there to do the session, that was in her list of questions. You know, what would happen with me and my dad, and what happened with my brother. And what she came to, as she went over that question, when Scott asked her, so you have a question here about your father and your relationship with your father, and why it went the way it did. And she said, oh, I see. Yes, I clearly see that I had agreed to let him, or to help teach him, the energy of those actions. I agreed to help teach him about the energy of those actions. In that moment, she was able to forgive him for something that he had asked her to do so he could learn the negativity of it. But the courage of someone to sign up for a difficult life, the courage of being able to say, I can handle that. I can handle something as heinous as that because I want to help someone learn from it. Wow, that's powerful. She said, in terms of my brother Scott, he signed up to examine the energy of excess. And Scott said, well, I'm sorry he wasn't able to fulfill that. And she said, no, that's what he signed up for. to experience all of that. The experience, what happens, the waves of energy that go from an act of overdosing, of how it affects other people, because you carry that negative stuff within you and you have to overcome it, you learn from it. You know, that thing of gold does not become gold until it's burnished, until it's polished, until it's pulled. You know, it's like a diamond that needs to be, the dirt cleaned off it to get to it. So that journey that we have from each lifetime, the difficult things, we've all had them. We've all had difficult things happen in our lifetime. And so when you examine why you chose this lifetime, think about those difficult things as well, and how you've overcome them. And one other thing, all the sessions that I filmed, so maybe 20 now, every single one, somebody wants to know, how am I doing now? That's always the question. If I get to my counsel, I want to ask them, so how am I doing? The answer is always the same. You're doing exactly what you signed up for. And you're doing a great job. So give yourself credit for getting this far. Boy, that's new. Give yourself credit for getting this far. You know, a lot of times we go through life and it's like, oh, this terrible thing happened to me. You know, I can't go on. I can't possibly go on. Yes, 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 you can go on. You signed up for this. Give yourself credit for getting this far. As you know, a lot of people can't. They don't. Whatever. They go back. They beat themselves up because they couldn't handle it. They couldn't, you know, get that far. Blah, blah. But back there is all about forgiveness, about understanding, about moving forward. So, all right. Let me end there. Thank you very much. And oh,